Hi, I'm Luca. I'm in first grade. I'm listening to the West Ada podcast.
I think on a story like libraries, I think sometimes it's almost more important to tell readers what we don't know at this point, as opposed to what we do know. Because I think there's a lot we don't know about how this is really going to play out on the ground.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the West Ada podcast.
Woohoo!
School's almost here.
It is. It's like here.
School is right around the corner.
Summer goes so fast.
It really does. But we are so excited that you are here to join us for another special edition of the West Ada podcast. Yeah. A couple of great guests today.
Oh, man.
Jennifer Swindell is the CEO and the managing editor, of the Idaho Education News website. They do amazing work. She's here, and Kevin Richert.
Kevin Richert, he's an award-winning journalist, and he and Jennifer kind of founded Idaho Ed News, at the same time. And they really are like I said, an award-winning news outlet. They're unbiased. They are straight shooters, like I say in the podcast, and we just have a great conversation with them.
Well, there's lots of stuff we're talking about. House Bill 710, the library bill. There's a lot of stuff here. I think you're going to like this conversation just because getting to know these people. If you don't consume Idaho Ed News yet, I think it's something you should really consider because it is super informative, at least in my house.
Well, and like we talk, as parents and guardians of students in West Ada, and even as just patrons in the district, you need to empower yourself with knowledge, and you want to get it from a reliable, accurate source. And Idaho Ed News is a place to do that.
Well, here you go. Jennifer and Kevin, here's our conversation with them. Enjoy.
Jennifer Swindell, you are the managing editor and CEO of Idaho Ed News, and we have Kevin Richert, who is a phenomenal journalist, been around town for a while. Welcome. It's great to have you both here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Jennifer, why don't you share with us a little bit about your background, both in Idaho education and in journalism?
Yeah.
Well, I've been doing this for a very, very, very long time, as has Kevin, and we've been doing it together for a very long time. But I've been in Idaho journalism or communications fields for more than 30 years. And I've had a variety. Well, I started out as a writer, reporter in sports, and I've had some editor roles in sports and education and government. I was the government editor at the Statesman and was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to launch Ed News about 11 years ago.
11 years. I remember when it started, and it feels like it was maybe 5 years ago.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It does.
Yeah. And Kevin, you as well. I mean, you've been a journalist here in Idaho for over 30 years. Is that correct?
39 years now. And it's been, it's been reporting and editing really all over the state. I started in Pocatello. I worked in Idaho Falls for a while, then Twin Falls before I came to Boise. And that's really kind of helped with Idaho Ed News because we are trying to cover education statewide. I feel like I know a little bit of the landscape in southern and eastern Idaho. And, came to Boise in 2001, worked at the Statesman as editorial page editor until the launch of Idaho Ed News in 2013. And I've been there ever since.
Well, you bring up a really good point about getting to know the whole state. I was previously able to work with every district, school district in the entire state. And Idaho is so unique. And so when you represent you're trying to represent Idaho education, all of Idaho. That doesn't just mean what's happening right here in the Treasure Valley. That's what's happening way up in the Panhandle and way in the very southeast corners of the state, right?
It helps in terms of covering education. It also helps in terms of covering the legislature. Ryan Suppi and I covered the legislature from start to finish. And I feel like because both of us have some background around the state, we know some of the players, we know some of the local politics, and we know how that kind of ties into the bigger picture of state politics. It all helps.
Well, and this is kind of an aside, but I want to ask this question. I mean, you were a sports editor, first female sports editor at the Statesman. What was that like, Jennifer, back in the day? I mean, to be in that sports world, and because I love sports. What was that like back in the day?
It was different then, right? Back in the old days.
Sure,
I can remember being a sports reporter and not being allowed in the locker room,
right.
But all the male reporters were allowed in, and I would stand out in the hall waiting and praying that the coach would come out, to say, will you remind him I'm still standing out here waiting for him?
I'm out here.
And, of course, the whole world is, then women just started going in, and then now they have press conferences. Like I was there when everything changed. I was there when we didn't have recording devices. We dictated stories over a phone.
Cannot imagine.
And
Yeah,
there's
cannot
no
imagine.
computers. I mean, back in the good old days.
Right.
So
Been there, done that. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I became sports editor, I did take some heat now and then. And my thing was always that, well, Howard Cosell, he also didn't play football, but everybody loved him.
Right.
And most of your audience probably doesn't even know who Howard Cosell is.
Well, half loved him and half hated him back in the day. That was a kind of an interesting
Yeah,
Howard Cosell thing. But anyway, yeah.
I didn't
yeah.
play football, but my dad was, he coached locally for about 20 years at Capitol High School.
Right.
And so at least the name Swindell, there was some history in sports in the community. And so that maybe helped a bit, but
long time in the community, I'm sure it helps you do what you do now. I would assume.
That's one of the reasons why I think Kevin and I do well in this. We've been doing this for a very long time. We have built lots and lots of relationships. We've built trust. And so our organization, Ed News, really took off, I think, because we weren't starting from scratch as far as our relationships and our known talents.
Well, and it's not like you jumped from sports to education, because when I first, I started working in Idaho Education maybe 17, 18 years ago, and I knew you from working in school district, right?
Yes, I spent 4 years working for the Caldwell School District as their public information officer. And then I went to Boise State and became a communication director there, where I got to work with all the school districts in Idaho, I traveled the state working with different school districts on a special project. And so the transition was pretty easy.
So how did Idaho Ed News come about? Like, what was the impetus for creating that?
Well, back in November of 2012, the regular other newspapers were starting to cut back on their education coverage around the country and locally. And people just weren't, there was no place to get any information on public education, what to know about your kids. And there was all these conversations. And there was these so-called Luna laws that were up for election in November and were repealed. And there was this sentiment of, it maybe wasn't so much about the laws themselves, but about the misinformation and not knowing what was happening and how they were going to be implemented. And so I came up with the idea of launching an education-only news website. And I took my idea to the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Family Foundation, and they were gracious enough to support my idea. And that's where it took off. And so
that's
grew
really
from
cool.
there.
Well, and Kevin, are you from Idaho? I know you went to school, journalism school at Northwestern.
Right. So not originally from Idaho. I grew up on Long Island.
Oh, okay.
Way back east.
Yeah.
But came to Idaho, really flew out to Idaho the day after I got my degree. So, literally have spent my entire professional career in Idaho. And, to go back to what Jennifer was talking about the launch, for me, the decision to join Idaho Ed News, it came at a point where I saw things changing in news media. I saw the cutbacks that we were seeing in traditional media, but I also thought and believed then and believe even more strongly now that niche publications, nonprofit publications, online publications are going to play a much bigger role in journalism, not just in Idaho, but across the country. And I wanted to be on that. I wanted to have a chance to try that out and also to specialize. My dad was a school teacher. My dad was a coach too. So, there's some education in my blood, and the chance to specialize journalistically and to specialize in a topic as important as education, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to make the jump.
Now, does it make a difference? Does it matter that you're a nonprofit, and how can that kind of contribute to the work that you're able to do?
Well, it's important that our funder has no editorial influence over what we do, because
imagine that
people would think that we were driven by an agenda. But because, when we first started, we had to overcome that. And my answer was, well, we stand by our work. So, trust our work. But there's so many more now nonprofits. It's grown tremendously around the country that it's become a normal way of getting news. And so it's not quite so novel as it was when we started. But because we're a nonprofit, we're able to share our content for free, so it's available to anyone. We have no paywall, we have no advertising, and then we also give away all of our stories for free for any outlet that wants to pick it up. So we don't compete, we share knowledge. And so however we can dispense of accurate fair information. That's our goal.
Yeah, I love that.
As a consumer of information and a parent in the district, I mean, my kids have only ever attended school in Idaho. It's important for me to know that because I know that I can trust what I'm reading when I read one of your stories. You know what I mean? You're both very straight shooters. If people don't know you, like you tell it like it is, and you will tell it like it is, fair and just and unbiased, which is really hard to find these days.
Yeah,
it's hard to know and decipher that kind of information. So I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you've kind of already touched on this, Kevin, but why, or either one of you, but why are independent voices so important? And we touched on it, I know, but why is that important?
I think they're more important now than when we launched in 2013 because of the way people are consuming news and where they're consuming news from. I think sometimes people don't realize who's providing the news that they consume, and I think there's maybe a lack of media literacy in the world.
Sure.
People really not
Sure.
Thinking about who's providing your information and how independent and how reliable is that information. So I think being a nonprofit, being independent, I think people can see that we don't have a hidden agenda. We don't have we don't have a profit motive or anything like that.
Yeah. Objectivity is so important, but it's hard to come by these days. It seems like, and that I'm editorializing a little bit, but it's hard to come by sometimes. Yeah.
And you guys have a relatively small staff. I think there's maybe 7 of you.
We have 7 full-time and a couple of part-time.
Okay, and a couple part-time. And do you have you're funded through? Initially, you said grant through J.A. Catherine Albertson. Are they your full funders? Do you apply for other grants and things like that?
They are our primary funder, but we apply for grants all the time. We have a handful of other organizations that support us, including the Education Writers Association, which is a national organization. Solutions Journalism supports us. And so we do have other grants, but our primary funder is local.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool. Well, I know, Kevin, you do a lot of different things. Obviously, I think you started writing, but now you do podcasting. I know you've done a lot of broadcasting stuff with Channel 6. What's the difference between those different mediums, and why do you choose those different mediums?
Well, I decided early on that for us to get our information out, we should partner with as many other outlets as possible. So,
novel concept, yeah.
So we do spend a lot of time doing segments with public radio right now, public television. We've done a lot in the past with Channel 6. I think it's important to get our information out and to get the journalism that we're doing, get it out to as wide an audience as possible. And, really, I guess, journalistically, I think communicating some of my stories in a broadcast venue really helps me kind of focus my thought in terms of writing. I think it makes me a better writer, even as I'm writing a long form story. I'm having to think, okay, how do I translate this to a radio segment or a TV segment, and how do I get to the gist of it really quickly, and really summarize the point of this very long and probably very complicated story.
Editing matters, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Ken and I serve on the communications team here at West Ada, and we know that people consume information in a variety of different ways, and it's so nice to be able to have the different options. The quick snapshot blurb on social media, then you can click and you can go and read the story, and then usually in the story there's a hyperlink to an audio interview or something like that, and it's all just different ways we can digest information. So I appreciate that.
Right. We have to say the same news or the same information in a variety of formats, platforms, and in time of day as well. We're finding, and just now we had a lot of consumers on Facebook, and it's sort of trending away from Facebook and now more Instagram. And we don't really have a strong presence on Instagram, so we're talking about how we beef that up so that we reach to our consumers in the way they want to use the news.
Well, how do you decide that, Jennifer? I mean, because obviously it almost feels like in 2024 the target is kind of moving. How do you as an editor go, okay, we need to look at Instagram more closely, or what's that thought process like?
Well, we make data-driven decisions. And so we look at the data very closely. We look at trends, who's using us, how old they are. We do market surveys. And so it's looking at your audience and adapting to them. And we talk to other people around the country and what they're doing and at other publications.
West Ada serves nutritious meals every school day under the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program. Beginning in August, students at Meridian and Eustick Elementary Schools will receive free breakfast and lunch under the Community Eligibility Provision. Beginning August 1st, you too can apply for free or reduced meals by visiting the Link Connect website in today's show notes. If you have questions, please contact West Ada's Director of School Nutrition, Anne Brock. Her contact information is also in today's show notes. West Ada School District, preparing today's students for tomorrow's challenges.
Well, we talked about staying relevant in how you deliver your message, how you deliver your news on different platforms and things like that. Yeah. But it's really important to have local voices. Nothing bugs me more than to open an article written by someone who has no idea about the culture of Idaho and the way things are run here, and they're trying to write a slanted story on how we do things here. So will you elaborate on why it's important to have those local voices?
Well, local news holds local officials and leaders accountable.
Yeah.
Right.
And it also gives a voice to those who may not otherwise be heard. And local news is the heart and soul of America. And it's so important, and especially now, that we have strong local news as things become more transparent and holding accountable is what we do.
Well, and the state of journalism is really changing. So journalism is my background, and it's changing, and it has been changing for a while. And we've touched on this already a little bit. But in your opinion, Kevin, if you want to start, what's the state of journalism in 2024? How has it changed even since Ed News came online?
I think there are great things happening, and I think there are some troubling things that are happening. I think the great thing that is happening is that you've got this ecosystem of small micro newsrooms that are doing really good stuff. I mean, our coverage of education policy and education politics is better than anybody's in the state because we have the time and the resources to do it right. You look at the Idaho Capital Sun; they do a lot of really good coverage of state government, really good coverage of the legislature. Public radio, public TV do a really good job of covering public policy. You've got Boise Dev does this really good job of covering local business, the local economy.
Their morning read is great every morning. I love their morning read. Yeah.
So we've got these really good and dedicated journalists across all of these other platforms doing really good specialized niche journalism. What worries me, what troubles me is we still need those full service news organizations that are covering everything else.
Sure.
Because when we're at the legislature, Ryan and I, we're going to cover education committees, we're going to cover education policy. We'll cover it really well, but there's a lot of stuff going on at the legislature that we're not going to cover. So we really still need the daily newspapers to do good work. We still need the TV stations, the commercial TV stations to do good journalism. We need it all, but we've got a lot of really good stuff going on at the micro level.
Love that.
Our legislative session, I love it. It moves so fast. We start a few days into January, and then if sine die is not happening by like the end of March, early April, it gets really ramped up, and it happens fast. There's a lot of bills introduced and things like that. So I really appreciate that you're there during the legislature.
I'm glad you think it happens fast because it turns out to be a long session for us by about the early part of April.
It feels like it happens fast. If you're just kind of a layman and you're trying to keep up on things and where are they? Are they in the House? Are they in the Senate? Trying to navigate that process that you cover so well. How do you digest all of that? Is it participating in meetings, being in sessions? How do you even eat that elephant?
Well, I think we have the advantage, Ryan and I, of really being there full time. This is our job from January to March or April or whenever they decide to adjourn, and that's where we are day in and day out. So we can go to every committee meeting. We can go to every House Education and every Senate Education Committee meeting, I should say. We can be at the Budget Committee when they take up the education budgets. We can be in the tax committees when they take up tax issues that matter to education funding. We can be at the State Affairs Committee when they take up libraries or elections. So we can do that. And Ryan and I both have experience covering the legislature with other outlets in addition to our time now at Ed News. What we have to do is just sort of leave a lot of the other stuff that's really interesting stuff that's outside of our lane. We're not going to cover abortion. We're not going to cover transportation funding. We're not going to cover Medicaid. We have to trust that that's going to be covered by other reporters. We're going to stay in our lane and do our stuff.
Well, and Jenna, from your seat, how do you decide what you cover? Because you've got to kind of make sure all the bases are covered. How do you decide that? What's that process like?
Well, actually, we're lucky because it's education. If it's education related, we cover it. And so we don't have some other media that has to cover all of it. They do have to make some more difficult choices than we do.
You can be more hyper-focused.
We can be hyper-focused. We cover anything education related. And we're also lucky because we're online. So space is unlimited.
Yeah.
So
That's one of the good changes of journalism, right?
Yeah, certainly for us. I mean, when I used to work at a print product, we called it feeding the beast. You had to fill a newspaper. Jerry Seinfeld said, "Isn't it amazing how everything that happens in one day fits perfectly into a newspaper?"
Amazing, yeah.
And so we don't have to do that. So we do have this luxury, and we have 4 reporters, and two of them cover policy creation, which is Kevin and Ryan, and then we have 2 that cover policy implementation, and that's how the policies are then implemented into teaching and learning.
Sure.
And so we do have to give up on some things, but we get to it eventually.
Right.
Yeah. You have good systems and structures in place. I can tell that just in this, this far into our conversation.
100%. Well, in the legislature, Kevin, I can't imagine how that ebbs and flows and some of this. I can't imagine what you've seen in the last few decades. What's the hardest or the most difficult story you've ever covered?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's been a lot. I mean, and it's not just legislative stuff. I mean, I think one of the hardest stories I ever covered, and has absolutely nothing to do with education, but it has to do a lot with journalism and just sort of the unpredictable nature of journalism, was covering, it is education related because it happened at a school. It was at Cokeville, Wyoming in 1986. Cokeville is this really small town. It's right across the Idaho line. So it's about 2 hours from Pocatello, where I was working at the time.
Okay.
So one Friday afternoon, an armed couple, had homemade gasoline bombs.
Wow.
Took over the elementary school. They were trying to hold all of the kids hostage. Look it up. It was a really frightening and remarkable story,
to say the least.
Long story short, because it's getting to be a long story, it happened on a Friday afternoon. I was the only reporter in the newsroom on that Friday afternoon in May. Most everybody else had put in their 40 hours. So we heard that something bad was happening 2 hours away. We didn't know because we couldn't really scare up anything on the radio. There was no social media. We weren't getting live tweets or anything like that. It was just
the old days of listening to a scanner almost kind of thing. Yeah.
Kevin, go to Cokeville, look it up on the map how to get there, and write something. And that's how it began. So I guess it speaks to the kind of the unpredictable nature of the business, which is what's still exciting about this business. We don't know what's going to happen, in terms of breaking news. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of breaking developments at the legislature. Any day can be unpredictable and surprising, and it's just, you show up every day, you think you know what's going to happen, you have a plan, but that plan doesn't always, come to fruition, and sometimes you change the plan for something even more interesting because something even more interesting is unfolding.
Yeah. I was grateful for Ed News when the pandemic hit. Still to this day, March 2020 is the most popular month. We had hundreds of thousands of readers, and on Friday the 13th, March 13th, when the governor declared we were in a pandemic, by Sunday they were starting to close schools. And so we all had to go to work on Sunday, unusually for us. And from then we worked, 60, 70 days in a row. But that Sunday was so popular on our website because parents were craving news. What is happening? With school, and what do I do for Monday morning? And so news sells, and people come to us for news. And so I've been forever, that's one of my most memorable days, at least with news.
Well, I was one of those parents. I was constantly going because you were updating information where we couldn't find it anywhere else. So thank you for March 2020.
And that's an extreme example of it, but that's what keeps the news industry vibrant in spite of all of the financial considerations. What keeps the news industry vibrant is that people want news. They demand 100%. It. They need it. And they come to people they trust when they need the information. So there's always going to be that demand. And I think the demand is even more than it's ever been. So we just have to figure out how to supply it. And as an industry, we have to figure out how to supply it and make it profitable. Those who are in the profit business and those of us in the nonprofit business just have to deliver timely and relevant stuff.
Well, and we do this podcast. Katie and I always say we do this podcast because we're trying to inform our parents, and so what you all do. I'm not blowing sunshine at you, but there is so much huge value, whether it's March 2020 or today. That stuff's not going away. Parents need information. We all need information.
Well, and Kevin, you just mentioned building trust. People go for news to a source they trust, and I would suspect it has something to do with your mission. I mean, your mission. I'm not quoting it, but you have an accountability and a transparency and holding, lawmakers and schools and things like that, like us, accountable to our taxpayers and our citizens.
Right.
Do you believe that your mission has built trust and that's kind of how you do it? Or are you intentional in other ways about building trust with your readers?
Well, of course, we're intentional about building trust, but I think that our work speaks for itself, and that it's our work that has built us trust. And we talk every day about accuracy, and we say things to each other that, I don't ever want a source in a story to be surprised when they go to read the story. They should be very clear on our intent. This is what we're writing about.
We've covered this ground kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but well before the story's been published. So there are you might not
you
you
have a chance to respond to it, that kind of thing. I mean, yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, you've given us that opportunity where a story's been published and there might just be some minutia that is inaccurate, and we've been able to reach out, and you've printed a what's the word?
A retraction.
A retraction or a change immediately.
Oh, absolutely. More important than anything else, I want our readers to get the most accurate information, fair and accurate. And if what we publish isn't exactly what you meant to say, you may have said it, but it was out of context, yes, we're going to tell our readers what they need to know, what really is the truth and the accuracy.
Right.
And so we are devoted to that every single day. And so I just think trust comes over time.
And trust and accountability, that cuts both ways. We are accountable for what we publish and what we report. And I've had that conversation with lawmakers. I've had that conversation with school officials over and over. If you have a concern about something I've written, please come to me. Yeah. And the beauty of what we do as a web-based publication is that it's easy for us to come back and revisit a story, revise a story, do whatever it takes to make that story more accurate and more complete. I mean, I would much rather have somebody have that conversation with me than to just walk away and say, oh, well, whatever. They screwed up the story again, and those guys, you can't trust them. You can't count on them.
I mean, our cell phones are on our website. So
you're not hard to find.
You're not. We answer our phones and we return emails.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, in this relationship building, and again, we're plowing ground we've kind of already been through, but building those relationships, why again is that important? If a lawmaker or someone at West Ada is like, hey Kevin, I said this, why is building those relationships so important for your readers, for our parents? Why is that important?
Well, again, I think part of it's just being there. When we are at the legislature every day, lawmakers, education stakeholders, lobbyists, they know who we are and they know how to find us. And hopefully they know that means that if they have a concern with the story or something that they feel like we missed, something that we ought to follow up on, they know how to find us.
And just to add to that, I mean, we share the same goal. We want kids to be successful. We want teachers to be successful. We want the West Ada School District to be successful.
Sure.
And so we are not prescriptive. We don't know how to do that, but what we can do is empower you with knowledge. And so in that vein, come and talk to me and let me know, what should we be writing about? What should your parents and your patrons know about what you're doing?
Have you subscribed to our YouTube channel? Go to YouTube, search West Ada School District, and like and subscribe today.
Jen, I love that you brought up empowering with knowledge, right? And that's something that we aim to do through this podcast, is empower our parents with knowledge. Idaho is a wonderful state. We have tons of school choice, but sometimes it can be overwhelming. So empowering yourself with knowledge, and where do we get that knowledge? Idaho Ed News.
Well, and I say to parents, I said, you'll spend more time shopping for a car than you will the appropriate education environment for your child.
Right.
And in today's world, there's just a lot of options, a lot of choices, where you live, which district you go in, and not only empowering yourself with knowledge, using EdNews as a tool, but using your principal as a tool, not your only source, using other media outlets, using your communications department. All those things are important, and being engaged in your school environment also helps. And I'm sure you all have lots of committees here that people can join. You might not want to be on a school board, but you should follow the school board and the decisions, because the school board are the ones that decide on policies, uniforms, masks, and dress codes, and all the things that happen in a school.
All the things that my kids care about immensely, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And while you guys are making those decisions within your district, we're reporting on them statewide, so you can learn about what's happening in other districts. Right.
Well, and I don't want to get on the soapbox. It's not my job. But one of the reasons why I'm excited that you all were willing to do this and have this conversation with us, I think that where you get your news from matters. And I've got two teenagers who spend time on TikTok and on Instagram, and their perception is that, hey, this is the news. And I'm like, well, consider the source. Right. What's the source? What's their agenda? Why is it important to consider the source, Kevin?
I think it's part of being an informed citizen. It's part of being an engaged citizen. And I've said this all along. You should certainly, ask who's providing your information and who's paying the people who are providing that information. I think that's a totally fair question to ask. I think it's fair for people to look at us and say, you're funded largely by the Albertson Foundation. Are you really independent? We stand by our work on that, but I think you can apply that same lens to any form of journalism. You can say, well, who's the primary funder of this outlet, or who are the big advertisers, who support this outlet? I think that's a fair question to ask, and I think that's just part of being a discerning consumer of news.
Well,
can you talk to my kids, please?
Yeah.
I'll give you my cell phone number afterwards.
That'd be perfect. Thank you.
It's on the website.
Yeah, it's there.
Then that's an extra step for them to have to look it up, but I can give it to you.
Well, and speaking of being discerning, you've covered the legislative session for us really well. Should we get into some of the things that were passed and kind of went through this?
Well, let's go to the deep end of the pool. Yeah.
Jump right in. I mean, we only have a certain amount of time with you guys.
It was obviously a very eventful session on education topics, and we had House Bill 710, the libraries law that went into effect, that school districts and public libraries, now they have to figure out how to implement this, and how is this going to affect access to materials? How do you respond to what the law is requiring libraries to do? How do you respond to the potential for a protest over materials, a potential civil cause of action? There's so much in the implementation phase that we're going to be covering, and we've already been writing about how school districts and how public libraries are responding to that. 521, House Bill 521, the huge school facilities law that provided $1.5 billion to put towards school facilities, but also did a lot more. I mean, it's such a complicated law. Ryan Suppi, again, who covers the State House with me, probably knows more about House Bill 521 than many of the people who actually voted for it. He's really dug into the details.
Gosh, there's so much minutia.
And there's so much there. I mean, it's such a complicated, multi-tiered law that he's spending a good deal of time working on the implementation phase. I've been covering Idaho Launch now for 2 sessions, so I'm focused now on the implementation. We just saw, Tuesday, how many students are receiving launch grants. It's somewhere around, more than 9,000 high school seniors receive those grants. Now it's going to be really interesting to see, what do they do? Do they see this through to get a degree or certificate? Do they stay in Idaho? Do they stay on these in-demand careers that they say that they're pursuing? So much that we cover this summer, leads us into covering the next legislative session, which, yikes, it's less than 6 months away. We're going to have more debate about facilities funding. We're going to have more debate over launch. We'll probably have more debate about libraries and how this law is working out. So for us to cover it, to explain to readers and to explain to communities how these laws are playing out on the ground, it's going to help us next session cover the follow-up debate about what happens with these laws and what happens on these issues going forward. So it's kind of a full-time job covering the implementation and the creation of public policy at the state level.
There's also, you skipped over an election.
That.
But I
Yeah.
encourage your patrons in West Ada to seek out how lawmakers voted on these various laws
Sure.
that Kevin's talking about, and then empower yourself as a voter with knowledge and find out, are they voting in the best interest of your family and your communities?
Yeah, we spent this spring coming right out of the legislative session covering the primaries and covering the Republican primaries around the state, and really being able to dig down into some of those really important primaries involving lawmakers who are prominent on education issues. We'll do that again in the fall. We'll take a look at the general elections. We'll focus on some of the legislative races that will have an impact on education in terms of who's representing districts.
I suspect if you talk to 10 different people on the library issue, you're going to get 10 different opinions or answers. My question is, how do you as a journalist, or either of you, how do you give our parents, our consumers, the information that they need? How does that process work? Can you tell how the sausage is made a little bit?
I think on a story like libraries, I think sometimes it's almost more important to tell readers what we don't know at this point, as opposed to what we do know. Because I think there's a lot we don't know about how this is really going to play out on the ground. How is a rural district going to segregate materials that may or may not be deemed harmful to minors? And that's a subjective term as well. How do you do that? How do you do that on the ground? How do you face the prospect of a private cause of action being brought by a parent or a student? I mean, we don't know a lot about how this works out. That's why I think you're hearing conflicting accounts about what's going to happen here. I don't think anybody knows for sure. And I think sometimes what you have to do in journalism is to say, here are some unanswered questions.
Right.
At this point in time that we will try to answer, but at this point they are unanswered.
Well, because how it affects a small district, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jennifer, but how it affects a small district is very different than how it affects West Ada.
Well, we also report on, here's what they're doing. Yeah. So it may not be an answer. There are no right or wrong answers.
Sure.
But we can report on, here's what Boise's decided to do with this going into the new school year. Here's what Salmon River's decided to do. Here's what West Ada's decided to do. So then you can look and see what other districts are doing and how are you going to react or share your opinion. Boise we just had a story on what Boise's doing about the libraries bill.
Oh, yeah.
And they changed policy to try to adhere by the law. Right. And they're getting advice from the association, the Idaho School Boards Association. They're trying to share advice. And so our reporting on it just helps enlighten everyone about what's happening around them.
Right. And I think it's important for our listeners, our parents and guardians, to understand that these are legislative mandates that we all have to figure out how to best implement them in our districts for the population we serve. I mean, West Ada is a huge district. We serve a very diverse population, and maybe reminding our listeners that it's our job to serve all kids, all students, all families, everyone. So we can't, we try to navigate policy implementation and things like that to best serve the majority. And that's a hard place to be in today's society, where people want to say, you do it my way, no, you do it my way. And we have to figure out how to try to make it, for the common good.
Yeah, you're not going to make everybody happy.
No, it's hard. I would like to. I say on this all the time.
That is your personality.
I'm a Pollyanna. I want everyone to be happy. I want everyone to be grateful. I want everyone to feel like we're all getting a little bit of something and compromise. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the world we live in.
Well, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but before I started working for the school district 3 years ago or whatever, I didn't know, this is horrible to admit, but a plant facilities levy versus a supplemental levy, House Bill 521, there's so many moving parts. And as you alluded to earlier, Kevin, how can, practically speaking, how can our listeners, how can our parents really inform themselves on some difficult issues?
Reading Ed News.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
And I think a lot of what we do, in addition to covering breaking news and developments at the legislature, is we do try to take a step back and try to explain and demystify some of this. I mean, you mentioned plant facilities levies. Carly Flandreau did a story some time ago that it's a feature that she does from time to time that we call Spelling It Out. And what she did was an explainer about bonds and levies, explaining the difference between a bond and a planned facilities levy and a supplemental levy. Not just what do they do, what's the threshold of passing a supplemental or a planned facilities levy or a bond issue. Really a good piece for somebody if you're coming in and you're confused, because this stuff is confusing.
Yeah.
It's okay to be confused by this stuff. It's very
not a
complicated.
layup. Yeah.
So we try as much as possible to help people take a step back and understand the terminology so that they can go forward and work their way through the rest of the debate, the rest of the issue.
Well, school funding is so unique in Idaho compared to other places. And we have so many new families moving in who may not understand how our schools and facilities are funded. And, House Bill 21 or 521 is specifically for facilities. And so it looks like we get all this money, but that can't be used for salaries and benefits. That can't take care of our teachers and our SROs and things like that. So I appreciate the spelling it out, because people need to know and understand how it works.
Well, and this might be too much minutia, but can you speak to lottery dollars with House Bill 521? How do lottery dollars play into that?
Yeah.
Is that too much minutia?
I'm trying to remember how or if 521 addressed the lottery.
Yeah, and I can't remember either.
And you really have to remember one way or the other. When you buy a lottery ticket, it's been billed as this school funding solution. It's always been a minor piece of that puzzle, regardless of whether that money is being distributed the way it's been in the past. We're still talking about tens of millions of dollars versus billions of dollars that's put into state K-12 budget.
Small percent of the budget.
I mean, it's money. You can see where there have been projects that have been done over the years with that money, but it's not a replacement for sales taxes or income taxes or other sources of funding.
Well, and when you're the largest district in the state, these dollars look very big, right? Like most of us are used to just managing our own home budgets. And so you see how much
Those numbers
money.
are small for me, but go on.
Yeah, right. Well, and you think, West Ada must just be rolling in it. Well, when it's $900,000 for carpet for one school or $1 million for a roof or a parking lot, trying to help people have that kind of perspective, it's hard. It feels
West
like
Ada actually has a small per pupil expenditure compared to what certainly below the state average.
Yeah.
Well, and as a communications department, we beat that drum and try and help people to understand that. But sometimes it's hard to get that message to stick, and that's our job. It's what we're supposed to do.
Economies of scale. It's my favorite thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the conversation, you guys. But before we leave you, and you guys don't have a crystal ball, but what are the things on the horizon that you could see? Hey, your parents in West Ada or your teachers or whomever needs to be aware of this. What's on the horizon that you guys are kind of have your eye on?
Well, it's extraordinarily important. Of course, I'm in news, but for your patrons and your parents to be engaged and follow what's happening. The political climate is going to change drastically, not just nationally, but locally. We have an election coming up in November. Please, be an informed voter. Please participate in your school board conversations. Your school board is responsible for educating all of your children and half of your tax dollars. And then we have, this legislative session, as Kevin alluded, there's going to be some important topics that will affect your life and your pocketbook, and one of them is school choice. And we're going to do a big series here ahead of the session to help inform, so that you then can let your legislator know how you feel and where you want your tax dollars to go and where you want them to support. And then we've got we'll have school board elections in 2025, and then 2026 is another huge election for Idaho, where our governor and state superintendent and legislative seats. And so start getting yourself prepared for those kinds of conversations. We have more options and more choices in education than ever before, which is wonderful, but that's also a responsibility for a parent.
Yeah, you can't be complacent. It's imperative.
We used to just send the kid down to the neighborhood school.
Closest school to your house.
And say, come back before dark.
Right.
And it's more
Dinner!
complicated.
Yeah. It's not that way anymore, right?
Yeah. I mean, and West Ada is doing a lot of innovative things. I'm just about ready to publish a story on your new busing system and tracking of kids, and that's innovative and exciting, and I'm sure it comes with a lot of dollars and challenges. And so I know that you're doing those things, but we're going to publish it as a bright spot to sort of show here's an effort being made, maybe others want to learn about it. And so really staying in touch with what's happening in your school and your district, and we can really help with that. And so are you with your podcast.
Thank you. Well, and statewide, I just have to do a little shout out because I care about education in all of Idaho. I really do, and all of our kids. And we have a very collaborative education community. Dr. Bubb meets with all the other superintendents, particularly Region 3, but all of them regularly. We have the school boards associations. We have administrators. So we have all these associations. So I would love for our listeners to know how collaborative all of education is in Idaho. And we learn from each other. Why reinvent the wheel if somebody else has a great idea and sharing those ideas. So I appreciate you sharing kind of bright spot stories like that other districts can learn from so that all our kids can benefit.
It's very fun.
Yeah.
Any parting shots, Kevin? I mean, before we sign off, anything we haven't asked you that we should be asking you?
Boy, no, I think Jennifer kind of summed up what to look for. I mean, we've got November elections. We've got the legislative session starts in January. We know we'll have a big debate over school choice. We know we'll have a continued debate over Idaho launch. I'm sure we'll be revisiting the facilities law, House Bill 521. And that's just what we know of at this point. Again, like we talked about, what's great about the news business is how unpredictable it is, but we can safely predict that it's going to be a very busy election and a very busy legislative session for us.
100%.
Thank you both so much for being here. I wish we could just talk all day. I'm sure we could.
Thanks for doing what you do. And also, in all honesty, what you all do is important, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to Jennifer and to Kevin. What an amazing job that they do.
Well, I just really appreciate straight shooters. I mean,
That's what they do,
in this world where there's so much information and I never know who to trust or what to believe.
Yeah.
I truly believe that they will give it to you straight.
100%.
So that's a great resource to have.
100%. Well,
Can't
thank you.
them enough.
Big thanks to them. And thank you, as always, for joining us. You can, wherever you get your podcast, please listen and subscribe, whether it's Google or Spotify, or if you listen on iTunes, please rate us and leave us a review. You can also watch the podcast on YouTube and subscribe. That always makes my life better. I love that. The big question for us today, I really want to hear from you. If you're watching on Facebook or on social media or wherever you've seen this podcast, how do you get your information? What are the sources of information that you get, and how and why do you trust them? We'd love to have that conversation with you because I think, to your point, we need to have trusted sources of information.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's awesome. And we have more fun episodes coming up for you
Another
this
one coming
school
up,
year.
yeah.
We're going to talk to some of our awesome college and career counselors, Anna from Eagle High and Ray from Owyhee High School, and just really kind of figure out how to navigate high school and those next steps after.
It's a very valuable conversation for you as parents, and I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But looking forward to that. And again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.